Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the broadcast this evening. Thank you very much for joining as usual. Good evening, sir.
Mr. Moderator, good evening to you.
How are you this evening, sir?
Fine, thank you.
Good.
The day has come to another end. We will look forward to a bright new day tomorrow. You're looking at your clock. Some of us, the clock that runs is in the body. It's not those artificial clocks on the wall.
Yes, when you said the day had ended, I was wondering, it's only just started. Oh, fantastic. To our viewers across the different platforms, this evening is going to be, again, another town hall, which means that you get the opportunity to contribute, you get the opportunity to share your views on an interesting topic for this evening. And this is the point around is an Arab, an African. And this is looking at the differences that we see there. And one of the questions that I wanted to put to you, sir, Prof, before we start to go into the detail of this is, why is this an important topic now? Why is it important for us to draw this distinction? Because some people might have a view that this could potentially cause a challenge. Over to you, sir. Why now?
Well, why now? Why not now? This issue has always been an elephant in the room. It's always been there as a factor, but the issue is, how would you address it? It's not that it has not always been there, but what are your objectives internationally as a group of nations? What are the objectives that you seek, and how do you want to achieve those objectives? Obviously, when before the independence of Ghana, the issue was not really raised the issue didn't arise. Yes, Egypt was there, and it was regarded as Egypt. Probably if you had asked in the 1950s, 52, they would have probably described Egypt as an Arab country. And the issues going on in North Africa, that is, even if a tribal coloration was going to be put to it, they probably would describe it as an Arab phenomenon. Nationalism in Tunisia, I mean, I have watched films done at that time. And even though you could clearly see Black soldiers being recruited as part of the Moroccan army, Algerian army, Libyan army. Well, I think they were just kind of, since nobody was raising an issue of racial discrepancy. Well, if they were Moroccan, they would have probably become Black Moroccans, and you go along. And then came the independence of Ghana. Ghana's independence, one could perhaps envisage how Ghana felt alone in Africa south of the Sahara. Where was he going to do? Where was he going to look at? Was he going to look to West Africa? They were all still colonies, hostile to him. Was he going to look south? You had the problem of Rhodesia, Zambia, Malawi, and of course, South Africa. He had to look north to see whether he will find anybody with any nation with a community of interests. And so he found Nasser in Egypt. And to some extent, the king also of Morocco. And of course, by that time, there has been this stretching out from Egypt towards India, towards Indonesia, etc., etc. And this is how the non-aligned movement came about. So there was, the question of Black Africans, Arab Africans, that kind of dichotomy did not arise. It was not relevant at that time. NASA needed all the allies that he could get. As he was not not NASA, Nkrumah needed all the allies that he could get, as he was not too popular with the West, who finally overthrew him, or regarded him as a communist or a radical. So nobody was going to go into that discussion of who is an African. You just ended up, without any attempt at deconstructing the concept of an African. They just decided whoever is living in Africa, within the continent, is an African. A geographical definition they gave to it, not a racial one, not a cultural one, but simply a physical, a manifestation of a physical presence. But it didn't take long for, discomfitures to arise. And the first person to raise it was Mobutu in the Congo, who felt that the Arab Africans were only Africans when it suited their purpose. And when it didn't, they were Arabs. But that they were playing a game of a leg in each camp. Whatever the international organizations, whatever posts the international organizations, allocated to Africa, the Arab African countries were quite happy to share in the distribution of those posts. But whatever was then given to the Mediterranean Arabs, they were equally glad to go there and share that with them. There were a few other issues that then arose. Mobutu had a hearing from Ufebonye in Cote d'Ivoire, but they were definitely in a minority. People felt that was not really an issue. And if it was an issue, that was not the time to raise it. In a roundabout, we come back to the question you raised, why now? But at that time, it wasn't regarded as an inconvenient topic, but it simply was not a topic to be raised at that time because we needed all the help with the Africans, the original Africans. We are going to end up, I hope, defining ourselves because I don't even know what terms to use to engage your minds this evening. But we felt that with South Africa there, with British colonialism still in Central Africa, British colonialism still in East Africa, don't forget Tanganyika, Zanzibar were all there. It was not the time to divide ourselves along racial grounds. A few inconvenient issues arose over the Arab relationship with Israel and which Arab was relating with Israel or which Arab was engaging with Israel, and therefore which Arab should we be defining our engagement with in terms of confrontation with Israel. Because obviously, while Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, and co were on the side of the Palestinians, Morocco, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf Arab countries were definitely not on the side of the Palestinians. And yet we in Africa had to decide which Arab, the Mediterranean Arabs, are those that would define our relationship, or the Gulf Arabs. You know, it was a minefield. And the best way we dealt with it was not by dealing with it, but increasingly, as we ourselves became more confident of our own independence and our own identity, questions then started being raised. One, when we talk about slavery, we tend to look at the slavery towards the Atlantic Ocean, across the Atlantic Ocean, and the Western countries that were involved in that. We conveniently developed amnesia about the slavery of the trans-Saharan mode, which by far was much, much older than the slavery across the transatlantic ocean. Number three, the treatment of Blacks in the Arab countries started becoming an issue, especially when the Arab Blacks we were now talking about, or let me put it this way, there were two resident Blacks in the Arab countries. You had those who were descendants from the old inconvenient slave interaction with Africans south of the Sahara. But you now as we became independent ourselves and we were spreading out in terms of diplomatic relations, trade, economic relations, you now have a new set of Africans who had no relationship with the Africans that were resident there. And this was then subjected to such cruel treatment. They were experiencing racism that they never even experienced under the British or the French before independence. I mean, I never experienced any racism growing up in Nigeria, even though I lived for how many years? Probably 20 years under the British colonial rule. I don't think the Ghanaian experienced any racism, at least not direct racism. So you can imagine the shock when a Nigerian or a Ghanaian or a Sierra Leonean then ended up in Morocco or in Tunisia or even in Egypt to now discover that there were two levels of citizenship in these countries based on the color of your skin. It came as a shock to the system. And the diplomats were not by any means exempted from this racism. And in the past 1 month or 2 months, we have had statements made by the president of Tunisia who had accused Black Africans of coming across to his country to change the demography of his own country, and that they were not wanted. They were responsible for all kinds of things. And several African countries had to airlift their people out of there. And now you have a problem in Sudan. On the surface, the problem in Sudan doesn't look racial, but it has very grave racial undertones. And so I think we as scholars, we owe it now to ourselves to define our own identity. Because if we don't, we may get then sucked into that conundrum, a racial conundrum, wherever Arabs and Black Africans meet. People may not know that actually at one time, from Morocco, from Egypt, all the way down to the Cape, was all Black. Arabs came out of the Saudi Arabian Peninsula and militarily, under the guise of religion, conquered North Africa. So they are actually a minority there, but it is a minority that is ruling. That's a long-winded, introduction on my part. But please, I would like to appeal to my colleagues on the platform to let us have an engaging, robust, because as you could see, I can't even, I can't, define who is an African myself. Is it going to be racial? I mean, anthropologically, I think it is a shame on the human race. On the human race, a shame that though our DNA says that 99.9 something percent of the whole of the human race has the same DNA, that what divides us is that tiny little bit that we can see, which is the color of our skin and perhaps the texture of our hair. And that is what is causing conflicts amongst us and leading to divisions.
Thank you for that intro, sir. And while I, again, please, to our viewers, if you want to make a comment, please do raise your hand. The team will pick that up and I will reach out to you. But while you do that, one thing that struck me as you were speaking was, to what extent, to what end, maybe I should put it that way, because I think about this and I look at Tunisia, Morocco, all the nations that are in that northern axis, and I ask myself the question, would we ever get to a point where our definition of who an African is or who an Arab is will go as far as potentially changing how we define what is Africa today? I'm not so sure we will get that far. And that's why in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, we identify ourselves, we know ourselves, and we say the Africans are the people who are maybe sub-Saharan, and the people who are not sub-Saharan maybe are more Arab than African. And it feels to me like that's going to cause more tension than it would bring peace to Africa as a whole. That's just what was coming to me as you were speaking. But our viewers, please do just raise your hand. Once I see that and I get notified, I will call you up. So sir, I don't know what you would say to that, sir.
Well, as you yourself raised that question, the reply given by Satchmo, maybe you guys are too young to know who Satchmo is. That's Louis Armstrong. And somebody once asked him in an interview, what is jazz? And he said, if you have to ask, you won't understand the answer. So who is an African? That's what we are here to, that's what we are here to define. There is no way we are going to get a neat definition. Because if you say it's Africans living below the Sahara Desert, some see the Sahara Desert as a dividing phenomenon. Some see it as a uniting phenomenon. I mean, there was a time, again, we're going to anthropology, when the Sahara Desert was a forest, and they've discovered, specimens, there of elephant, tusks, huge animal remnants and what have you. And it's not, I mean, you can imagine if the Israelis were living in the Sahara Desert, they probably would have turned it reverse, the desertification that has taken place. And I must point out, one of the major contributions of Gaddafi was that he went into the desert. He was able to dig into a reservoir of fresh water, which he then pumped out all the way to the northern cities of Libya for the supply of fresh water to them. So there's no doubt that the Sahara Desert is sitting on fresh water that with technology can be pulled out. So where the line will have to be drawn is going to be conjectural. We probably will have, I hope not fights, but we will have a long debate as to where you will draw that line. But it's not going to be a straight geographical line. It's going to be a wiggly line as you seek to try as much as possible to be neat about it. But, I mean, Africans come in different shades of color without even bringing in the Arab factor into it.
Yes, there's an interesting comment here. I think someone is agreeing with you on the basis that we should really be defining who an African is, because we're starting to see that divide on the basis of skin color. This person said, why should Arabs continue to be in the African Union? Only 2 weeks ago, Egypt was going to pull plugs on Netflix because they used a Black woman as Cleopatra. And sir, at the end of the day, it seems that this is predominantly boiling down to a debate around religion, culture, and the color of the skin. And those are factors that are not really going to change anytime soon. And regardless of how we choose to define those things, the inbred, maybe I use the word biases that we have in people will take generations to erase completely. But the key question becomes, how does this impact foreign policy? And for the foreign policy experts, people who may be on here and they're thinking, I've got to deal with situations in that area, to what extent would those things impact how they deal with those issues? So the floor is open for our viewers. You have a comment you want to make, just raise your hand on there. As soon as I see it, I'll call you up to make your comment. But sir, if we take those three things away, do we achieve neutrality in how we relate with our brothers and sisters who are from the northern part of Africa?
Well, I think that it's going to be an interesting conversation. It's going to be an interesting debate. We will need to go about it very carefully so that we don't allow issues that we raise create cleavages amongst ourselves. I say this because both Islam and Christianity are actually out of African religions that were then imported into Africa, and we were then asked to embrace either one or the other. So the religious aspect then cannot be a dividing or a defining factor, both in the north and in the south of the Sahara. We now accept we have Muslims and we have Christians. So we're not going to make that division along that line. I think that, as I said earlier on, I think that Mobutu Sese Seko was right when he said that the Organization of African Unity should be reserved for Africans south of the Sahara, where we would then have another organization called the Organization of Arab African Unity to encompass the whole of the continent. So the simplistic answer to your question is that the African Union should be reserved for Africa below the Sahara. While if we then decide, when I then say we Africans south of the Sahara, then decide amongst ourselves that we need to have an organization that encompasses or that recognizes the presence of Arabs in the African continent, where we would then have that organization if it is found to be necessary. But right now, I just think we've been taken for granted. I know that countries like maybe Somalia, Eritrea, Ethiopia, we'll have Djibouti. Those are countries in the middle. They are going to really have nights of agonizing as regards where do they belong. But for a country like Nigeria, in fact, we're at the top rank in terms of when the Sahara Desert decided to come down to Black Africa, we were the ones who got it first. Of course, because the ancient kingdoms of Ghana, Mali, Songhai were all, were all African, ancient African kingdoms that occupy what is now the northern part of West Africa, like Mali, Burkina Faso, and what have you. So most of us will have no problems. The problems are going to arise where the Arab countries meet the Africans, if there's anything like that.
Thank you for that, sir. I have someone who wants to make a comment. Can you please unmute yourself now?
Yeah, I have unmuted myself. Can I go on?
Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much. My name is Olali Lawal from the Department of History and International Studies, Lagos State University. Good evening, Prof. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
At some point, when we talk about the issue of identity in Africa, I came up with an idea that I call controversial dynamism, in the sense that I found out that many of those who define who an African is, they do it for targeted and structured purposes. And I'll give 3 examples. If you ask the likes of Marcus Garvey, who is an African, or people like W.D. Du Bois, they'll look at it from the issue of color pigmentation and tell you that an African is a black man. If you ask people like the Gamal Abdel Nasser, who is an African, he will tell you an Africa is one who has combination of Arabism, Africanism, and some snippet of Islam in his orientations. Now, in 1977, when we had Festac 77, when Nigeria was going to determine the composition of the Africans,
so are you still there? I think we lost you.
That will attend that Arabs should be in a cultural festival, or whether only Blacks should participate. At the end of the day, the festival ended up with the participation of all Africans, regardless of their skin pigmentations. So my take on this is that whoever is defining who African is doing so for some targeted and structured purposes. And that is what I call a controversial dynamism in the definition of cultural identity in Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that contribution, sir. Prof, do you want to respond to that, sir?
I enjoyed that contribution because he's just kicked the can down the road. It's avoided. You could see how he himself was battling with the conundrum that he sought to overcome. I happen to know that actually at Festac, we came very close to confronting this issue, because when General Murtala Mohammed took over, the issue was that was tabled before him was whether we should regard Festac as one of these wasteful use of our resources and cancel it completely, or if the decision was to host it, we should shrink it into really a festival of Black people. And I happen to have been involved, not centrally, but you know, at times when you work for government, there are times, you know, you just happen to be passing by when some decision is being taken, and it's like, oh, well, doctor, what do you think about this issue? That wasn't what brought you there in the first place. And that's how I got involved. And the position I took, because at that time, racism against us was not that manifest. So my position was, sir, the decision had been taken to invite everybody, one from Africa and two from Africans in the diaspora. I think we should just let it be rather than start another controversy. And even though Murtala Muhammad loved controversies because it allowed him to make up his mind and be sharp about it, he thought that was a clever way to avoid this issue. And he said, well, since the planning has been done on the basis of, you know, whoever lives in Africa, let us go ahead and have it that way. And that's really what happened. I believe that we then made a mistake. But you will see how we made that mistake. That it wasn't as if we were not thinking, It was simply because it wasn't an issue. Why I said we've made a mistake was, having had Vestac, I think that Nigeria, and that Nigeria was recognized as the pillar on which you are going to build whatever it is you are going to build. That's how we housed all the exhibits of Vestac here in Lagos. They're still here. I think we should have used that to actually impose a Black definition on the African identity, rather than we left it loosely. We didn't have to, because it wasn't a crisis issue. We didn't have to take a position and a decision on it. If at that time, we're talking about 75, 76, 77, we've had, what is happening in Sudan now, what's happening in Libya, the way our people have been maltreated and ill-treated. If we have had it at that time, I think we would have taken a skin color definition on Africa, and we would have got away with it, because the Africans in the diaspora, you can't say they are Black, all right, because of the miscegenation that had gone on. You nowadays, I'm sitting in front of my television set, and I'm watching people, reading the news on CNN, on Al Jazeera, on BBC, not BBC. BBC, you can tell, but CNN, Al Jazeera, and what have you. And I'm saying, am I looking at a Black person, or am I looking at a white person? Now, at the end of the day, you come to the conclusion that it's neither. It's a mixture. But I think that in terms of cultural and identity, we would have gotten away with it or we would have got our point across that we don't like the way we Blacks are being treated in the Arab world.
So I think Mr. Olawale Lawal has a very interesting point there when he said that people who seek to draw the differences generally do so for targeted reasons. And what occurred to me was, what are the targeted reasons for which we may want to draw this difference? Because you've talked about the way Black people have been treated. And even in Ukraine, we had this issue in Ukraine when the war in Ukraine started. And Black people were being treated slightly differently from how other people were different. You've already highlighted Tunisia as well. But one might ask that question. Yes, we want to draw the differences for a targeted reason. And that targeted reason could be equality, because we're not being treated equally. So from the point of view of the average person, you find yourself, you're Black, you want to go to a different country. What kind of support should I be getting? What difference would it make to me if I find myself in Morocco and I'm Black? What kind of protection would drawing the difference provide me there? And maybe we need to give people those kind of ideas and those kind of thoughts, particularly policymakers, who can then put in appropriate policies like we're seeing on discrimination that stop people from treating the other parties differently. To our viewers, please do ask your question. It will be interesting to hear different points of view on this matter.
If I may come in here, I think that yes, I mean I like the conceptualization by Dr. Lawal. We don't like the way we are being treated. So one targeted objective is, as you rightly put it, we want to be treated fairly. Number two, since we Black Africans are in the majority in the African Union, if international organizations allocate posts to us, there will be nothing like, oh, automatically we'll divide it among ourselves. We, the majority of the Black Africans, will decide if there are two posts. We must really decide that, well, the two should really be for Black Africans, given our majority. But if there are three, we will take two, they will take one. But I think we need to have a conversation on the issue. And the more we raise the issue, I think the more they will realize they have to change their attitude, or else they will lose their membership of the African Union. I think, for example, that we should have suspended Tunisia, or, I mean, after all, there are provisions for suspension, but that is based on whether you carry out a coup or not. Well, already the camel has entered, inside the tent. The concept of suspension has already received, we've already accepted that. We now just need to add another thing to it. Discrimination against fellow Africans will be another ground for suspension. But we, the Black Africans, need to talk to ourselves.
I've got someone else here with their hand raised. If you bear with me 1 minute, can you please unmute yourself and make your comment?
Yeah, thank you so much. I greet you all with all humility and profound respect. Greetings, Prof. And all the just I had listened keenly to the discussion, and this thought is coming into my mind. Just like the Prof said, that Africans must have a discussion. They must have a discussion about our identity, because identity is the greatest crisis that has befallen not only Africa, humanity as a whole is identity crisis. There is no greater crisis in life than this. And the greatest enemy of man is ignorance of self. So I would like us to start from, my name is Musa Ododo Abdurrahman. I am the founder and president of an NGO called Initiative for Discovery of Nigeria Heritage and Endowment. Thank you. So I said the greatest crisis that we face as a human being is an identity crisis. And I love this so much because I had been thinking about it for a long time. And I would like us to zoom it to Africa, and not only Africa. I want us to come home, because the identity that you give yourself is what other people, is all other people address you. I think that's the cross of it. Is the name that you give yourself, is your identity that you give yourself. That is what other people address you. That is the way I see it. And this discussion, again, took me to what I have, for many years of my life, I have been studying and researching about that. Who are we as a people? I ask myself this question as a Nigeria now, I don't want to go outside. I'm looking at in Nigeria now. Because let's start, if we start at home, if we can identify who we truly are at home, I think that one will give us the spectrum. I think it will give us the perspective of looking higher, because there's nothing closer to you than yourself. So, and I asked one of the pertinent questions that I asked in my research about in creating a new Nigeria, because I have been working on that. How do we create a new nation? How nationhood? And the first question that came to my mind some years back is that question that we are looking at, though in a broader perspective, in an international perspective. But I just want to draw us back to in everything starts from self. Let's look inward. Let's look before, because if we can get this inward, it will define what other people outside will look at us. And I began to ask my question many years back: who are we as a people? Who are we as a people? Because if you look at Nigeria, what are we? Are we going to define ourselves as Hausa or Yubo or this? And I came to this conclusion, which of course is how I would like the great minds there to look into too. No one has an absolute knowledge. Is that you cannot solve these are fundamental questions of life, and which it has posed an existential threat to all of us as a Nigerian, even as an African, and even as humanity, just like where I started from. So, and to solve fundamental question of life, you cannot solve it with the same state of consciousness or knowledge level that created them. Meaning that intellectually, if you look at intellect itself, as we want to start intellectual, if we look at intellectually, we will not be able to get the answer to this, because intellect, as its nature of intellect, it divides. I'm telling you, the nature of intellect is that this person has a view. Some people said we are this, they have given the race, this color. They are now decided that the best to look at it, we must raise, if you want to solve problem, we have to start we have to explore the inner dimension of our intelligence. And I came to this conclusion that we are universal being, especially Black. If you look at history, and I look at history, people said that the first human being is from Black, and you can see there's no how Africa can define himself, rather than to accept who we truly are as a people. This is my own, what comes to my spirit.
Thank you very much for that, sir.
That we are universal being, that African is a universal being, that we don't have, and which is true, it's not only Africa per se, humanity is a universal being. The breath that is breathed into every human being does not have any coloration. It doesn't have race, it doesn't have ethnicity, it doesn't have religion. We are human beings, and that is the identity we must apply. No matter how long it takes us, this consciousness must be raised. Let's start from Nigeria. That you are not Hausa man. Yes, we can be Hausa man. That is how nature has it. But truly, we are all from the same source. We are universal being, a cosmic citizen.
Thank you very much for that. So I'll let the Prof respond to that. But before I do, sir, there is a question someone has put here. Latif A. Bakari. Thank you. I think I saw a comment from you the last session as well. His comment here is, how do we exact influence given the socio-economic situation of the Black race? Do Africans have leadership with sufficient credibility to make demands of the world? And that's a very interesting point linked to what the previous contributor just said. But to the previous contributor, the reality, I think, is that, yes, we're all human beings, but when we are faced with the challenges around us, we are battling with the challenge of the color of our skin. We are battling with the challenge of where we come from. We are battling with the challenge of ethnicity. So as you rightly say, regardless of how we think about these things and what view we hold, the reality of what we're facing is still a debate that will be ongoing and that we'll have. But sir, to this point about influence of the Black race, do we have enough credibility to want to exert any form of influence on Africa?
Well, I'll say to Mr. Bakari, and I'm aware that he, in fact, is aware of the data. That by 2050 or so, we will be probably the second. No, we will be the largest population in Africa. And if we are the largest population in Africa, it means among the Black race, we will have the largest population. Now, population doesn't mean anything. It's what you use you make of it. There is a raging debate now among scholars. India has now overtaken China in terms of the largest population. And people are saying that, given the industrial base that India has now, that is a basis for celebration and not lamentation, because it has the industrial capacity to now use that population to drive its position globally. So I would say to Nigeria that our population, as well as the, if you like, the mini economy that we have, no matter how minuscule our GDP may be, it is still the largest in Africa. Yes, I accept people who will say this is coming from extractive industries. It's not really our own energy. It's nothing we are producing. People are digging up the oil for us and paying us rent. And it is from that we are making our GDP. Fine, I concede that. Even though I will say that in the past 5 years, my understanding is that the agricultural input into our GDP has actually been rising. Number one. Number two, our knowledge of the mineral resources that we have in Nigeria is sufficient for us to be able to boast that we are not a banana republic if we do two things. One, we stop the looting of our economy. So in other words, from stealing 90%, maybe our public servants and the people who put in government still only 15%. If we do that one, and number two, if instead of allowing our mineral resources to simply be dug up like they do in the Congo and just flown out without any, without any addition to our GDP, that will give, and then of course the third is for us to have a military industrial complex. I keep emphasizing that third one because that is really what Turkey has done to make it from a laughing stock to a country now where if its president sneezes, everybody from the White House down to Cyril Ramaphosa will say, what's happening in Turkey? There was a time when Turkey was just, was just like us in Nigeria. People not pay sufficient attention to it because it wasn't paying attention to itself. I think we have all the indices to be a serious country, depending on the leadership that we have. I mean, after all, there was a time under Gawan when the economy was growing at 20–25%. And there are economists who hold the view that if there had not been that 1975 coup and that, progression of, economic growth had continued with the kind of stable leadership that we had, that, our state will not be in the sorry mess that it is now. But having lamented, let us also hold our hope that we still can rescue the situation. And so my reply to Mr. Bakare is, it depends on the leadership that we have. I don't know how many times I have quoted Nelson Mandela on this platform, but what he said will always resonate with me, that until Nigeria gets its act together, Africa and the Black race will not go anywhere. In other words, he held out the hope that Nigeria can get its act together. He's just saying, when we decide, there are other countries who are making bids for leadership in Africa, but people know that they don't have the wherewithal to pull. If they pull together, it still will not amount to anything. Whereas if Nigeria gets its act together, it will be able to, it will have that sufficient gravitas to get others to pay attention to it.
Thank you very much, sir. On that note, we will bring the program to an end. We'll be back next week. I think the conversations are getting more and more interesting, and we will certainly like to do more and more of these kind of discussions. So we will be back next week with another interesting topic to dissect and at least get our minds thinking about. Thank you to everyone that contributed this evening. Thank you very much, sir. Once again, we'll be back next week. Good night, everyone. Have a lovely evening. Bye.